Welcome back to Sow, Grow and Cook on this cold November day. Let's have a look and see what's growing in the polytunnel.
Sow, grow and cook.
We'll start off with the flat-leaf parsley, which is just thriving in this microclimate. Flat-leaf parsley tends to withstand quite a lot of cold. It's a biennial and it'll go to seed probably in the spring, although some of it is going to seed now. I keep plucking off the seed heads, but I've lost track of this particular bit. There's a few baby Egyptian walking onions. Everything's sort of slowed down in growth, even in the polytunnel. It's just less light levels and it's cold, even though it's slightly warmer in here. So things are just not growing as quickly as they would in the spring and summer. Here we've got a small patch of leeks. Again, they're getting bigger, but they're taking their time. But that's fine because I've got quite a few leeks growing outdoors. The Swiss chard, which I planted in spring, is doing quite well. I've been picking quite a lot of it to put in curries and soups and egg dishes and spinach cheese pie. The asparagus plug plants that I've got growing in the polytunnel are doing fine. They're getting a little bit taller. I've got some self-seeded cilantro, or coriander as we call it here, and some self-seeded calendula growing. It's always nice to have a little bit of extra herbage growing in the winter. I've also got a little bit mixed up in the asparagus patch, a little bit of self-sown dill, which I love. As I've mentioned before, I love putting it into spinach cheese pie. There's some rainbow chard growing okay, and the bok choy plugging along all right. One of them's gone to seed. I'll maybe feed that one to the chickens. Now the baby carrots, which are a few weeks behind the patch further down the aisle here, they're doing well. I water them every few days. Because it doesn't get super hot in here at the moment due to the cold weather, they're not drying out quite as quickly, but they are growing slowly, just kind of plodding along. There we've got the more mature bed of carrots, which are doing really well. I've been harvesting one or two as needed, but I've got still quite a few outside, which I think I'll harvest first. Now, the central bed has got some purple sprouting broccoli, quite a few plants, and they're getting quite tall. Here's the raised bed in the center, and I would say these plants are probably 2 feet high. They're quite broad as well, sort of a spread of a couple of feet, and I probably won't be getting anything from them till early spring, I suspect. And further down the middle aisle are the indoor Brussels sprout plants. Equally, I think they'll be producing much later on in the season. As you see, my solar mole scarer is not beeping at all. I think you have to have a certain level of sunshine coming through before that works. Okay, further along we've got a few little garlic plants that I planted with from tiny bulbils. This is a bit of an experiment to see what happens when you plant them in a polytunnel at a very tiny bulb stage and just kind of ignore them. We'll see what happens in the spring. Further along I've got a few Swiss chard plants. which are doing okay, and some kale that I planted, which is getting decimated by slugs. Now, earlier in the season, I started putting these silicone cake cups down and filling them with beer to catch slugs. I caught a few. I need to top up the cases. It's kind of been a success, but it's not been entirely. I've got a few, but there's still some hiding out in here that are ignoring the beer and eating the plants instead. Right, here we've got some celery, which is proving to be really, really useful for soups and stews. It's a red variety, although you wouldn't know it from looking at it. Just a hint of red or pink on some of the leaves. It's got quite a strong flavour, so a little bit goes a long way. And you wouldn't sort of eat it as you would store-bought celery, you know, as a raw snack in a dip or something, although I suppose you could. But it's much stronger in flavour, so it's definitely got its uses and I would grow it again. Okay, moving along, I've got a few lettuce plants still. The one in the back has been decimated by slugs, never mind. I've got a couple of baby ones I've planted in their places, and some more Swiss chard, little tiny ones. More red celery. You can see the red on here now. Further along this last bed, I've got some bok choy coming. Aha! Little tiny slug caught you in the act. Right, soon put that to one side. More celery. Very useful plant, again, for soups and stews. This one's going to seed, but you can even use those as well as a flavouring. I've got a few young cabbage plants, which strangely enough are not being bothered by the slugs. I've got some tiny winter lettuces growing here, and they're not being bothered by the slugs. I've got a few slug traps here. But again, the kale is being nibbled on. I don't know why they're nibbling the kale, not the cabbage or the lettuce. It must be a much tastier plant for them, I suspect. And finally, we've got the rest of the indoor asparagus bed. And I'm just letting them do their thing. I may cut down the top foliage just to give the plants a rest so they can have a little bit of a sleep over winter and sort of gain some nourishment before they sprout again in the spring. But before I go, I'll just show you my broad bean plants, which I planted in October. These are the field beans. Wizard is the variety. They're normally grown as a field bean as a cover crop, which you cut down and then plough into the soil. But several people have told me they actually produce a really tasty broad bean type seed that you can eat, and I'm growing them for that purpose. Now, when these get a little bit bigger, I will plant them outside because they are frost hardy. In fact, I accidentally left them outside the other night when we had quite a lot of snowfall and it was really cold. And I was worried that I'd lost them when I realised that I'd left them out. But when I went to look at them outside, they were perfectly fine. They were just covered in snow, but took no harm at all. Equally, I've got a tray load of aqua dolce broad beans, which again I'll plant shortly when all of them have come up and got quite a lot of leaf cover on them. I'll harden them off. I'll start putting them outdoors more during the day, and then I'll plant them directly in the ground. Right, so that's it for November. Things are just plugging along nicely, and yeah, they're coming along slowly, but they're still coming on, and there's plenty of things that we're harvesting and eating from the polytunnel. Thank you for watching.